CollabTalk is a copyright of Collaborative ABA Services, making a difference in children's lives.
Hi everyone, welcome to CollabTalk, a new talk series by Collaborative ABA Services that provides information and resources about autism and of course everything in between. I'm Alicia, the founder of Collaborative ABA Services, and I'm here with some of our amazing team members. Team?
I'm Katie, I'm an occupational therapist.
I'm Meg, I'm a licensed social worker and registered behavior technician.
And okay. And this is Dopey sitting in for Bree Briganti, BCBA. So hello everyone. Today we're going to dive into the discussion about how to navigate insurance for much needed services of ABA therapy as well as other related therapies such as of course OT and speech. These therapies can definitely make a difference in a child's life, but the process of navigating that insurance process can become overwhelming and sometimes even confusing for families. So joining us today, we're going to break down what families need to know. We're also going to highlight some challenges, but also we're going to share some practical strategies for advocating for insurance companies to secure coverage for your child. So of course, we always got to do our disclaimer. Please note the purpose of this episode is to provide education and information to the community. It is not intended to critique or evaluate any specific insurance companies. So, team, let's dive into today's topic. So, let's kind of talk about, ABA and related services coverage in general. So, we do know that common insurance providers that cover ABA and related services, they do have like their own policies and protocols and guidelines for submitting authorization or what we call approval for services. And it's important to kind of know what they are, not only as a family member, but also as a provider. The other thing is also looking at, we're going to look at differences between private insurance and Medicaid coverage, as we know that there are big differences between those, like here in the state of Connecticut, even down to some of like the medical billing codes may look a little bit different from Medicaid to Medicaid and a private insurance company. And also looking at some of the criteria for like age caps and diagnosis requirements. Because as we know, like some insurances, the age cap might be like 22. For some insurances, it might be a younger age for others. And also looking at the diagnosis requirements for coverage as well. So let's kind of talk about authorization and eligibility. And so with authorizations and determining eligibility, there are steps for obtaining an initial authorization. And I can speak more for like example, ABA therapy. To obtain initial authorization, some of the requirements for different funders may be that the child has to provide, there has to be some type of documentation that the child has an autism diagnosis.
And a medical diagnosis, right? Which is different than, so if your child is, getting services in school under and we talked about this in the IEP episode, under the classification of autism, that's an academic, classification. So if you're looking to get private outpatient services like ABA, you need a medical diagnosis, which is different.
Absolutely. And a lot of insurance companies do require that you submit, the provider, of course, submits a copy of the autism evaluation to prove that that child does have autism. And I know some insurance providers, such as Medicaid here in Connecticut, if the diagnosis is more than, I believe, a year or longer, they would also have to submit a letter from the pediatrician or medical doctor indicating that the child has autism as well as need for ABA therapy. And also with that, submitting those diagnostic reports and additional information. I know like for occupational therapy now, they're requesting for Medicaid here in Connecticut, they've just started a new requirement where they have to submit IEPs.
Yeah, so if you, in Connecticut, if you're getting OT, speech, or PT services, and you're getting them in school or outpatient, or both, if we're doing outpatient services here, we have to then submit the IEP for Medicaid to be able to identify whether they're duplicate services or whether, if they're getting it in both places, why it's medically necessary. And I think that's the biggest thing when you're looking for authorizations for really any type of insurance, whether it's ABA, speech, OT, social work. They're looking for medical necessities. So we as providers have to have the documentation and the proof to show that this service is important and required for that child.
Right, like
Absolutely.
they compare like the treatment plan
Mhm.
to the IEP. And that was another thing, like a lot of the insurance companies require the treatment plan to cover the services, or they could like potentially like maybe appeal or deny. And also just having a copy of that, as a parent for yourself to refer back to like what kind of goals are being worked on, and
Yes.
kind of keeping track of that.
And that kind of brings up, thanks Meg for bringing that up, as far as the treatment plan goes, that kind of goes into reauthorization process and timelines. So part of the reauthorization process, each insurance company or provider may look a little bit different, but I know, for example, for ABA therapy, a lot of insurance companies do require a 6-month reauthorization period, whereas every 6 months we submit an updated treatment plan with updated goals, and as well as reassessment of the child's strengths and limitations, as well as data looking at their progress. And with the treatment plan and the data and information, that information, the insurance looks at it to determine if ongoing services is medically necessary. And if so, if the authorized or requested number of hours do meet the criteria for their requirements. And also with that being said, I know like ABA, like I said, is usually every 6 months, but I know like at one point here in Connecticut, Medicaid, for example, when we first did an initial intake for a child, they gave us 45 days.
Yeah.
And then we had to resubmit again to get the 6 months, every 6 month reauthorization process, whereas private insurance, it was automatically every 6 months, regardless. So it can, again, look different across different insurance companies. But a lot of times that 6 months rule has been very common. And I know like for like the OT world or the medical world, you guys might have a more or a different timeline, I believe.
Yeah, it's much shorter. It depends. So like when you're looking for services, you can always call your member hotline, or we have a provider hotline, and they will outline for you what your plan looks like. So for some private insurances, sometimes they have a cap, like, okay, you get 30 set visits of PT, OT, and speech a year. There's some insurances where you have an unlimited amount, so it all kind of depends. And so for certain insurances who have an authorization period, is typically about 12 weeks or every 3 months. So I submit a treatment plan, updated goals and progress every 3 months for all of the kids that I see currently. And I just have to identify the progress they've made, how much more time I need. And I think that's the biggest piece, is that because insurance companies are a business, there is that medical necessity level. So you get authorization, but it's only for a set period of time. So it's not like, okay, we're going to approve OT, for forever. It's okay, I'm going to approve OT for the next 12 weeks. And then the burden of the documentation is on the provider side. It's not something that a parent should really have to worry about. But I think it's important as a parent to know that my provider is continuing to advocate for my child, but at some point there might be a time where the insurance company says, okay, you've kind of reached the limit. So it's not like for forever. It's for, a certain amount of time.
Yeah, and for parents too, to kind of understand with insurance, if you're allowed to use multiple providers, some insurance will cover like, multiple OT providers or multiple speech providers, but not in the same day.
Yes.
So it's good to look at that as well. And then, if you're approved for the 30 sessions, is it 30 for each provider, or is it 30 split amongst multiple providers?
Most providers
as well?
split amongst, which is a huge bummer. But yeah, exactly what T said too. If you're looking to get services, you hit the nail on the head with multiple providers. For OT in the state of Connecticut, you can't get OT services at 2 different places and have it covered under your insurance. So you have to you can go to a different place for speech or a different place for PT, but if you're getting OT, it has to be at one place. So if you're kind of shopping around and finding the place that you want, maybe you get an evaluation and you want a second opinion, you can absolutely do that, but just be wary or be aware of what your insurance will cover, because if you go and get 2 evaluations within the span of a couple weeks, your insurance might not cover that second evaluation, and they can be expensive if you're paying out of pocket.
Yeah, and similar to what you were saying too, like I know like ABA therapy is similar, so it's really got to be one provider for ABA therapy. However, like for social work, there might be different providers. There might be a social work service for a social skills group, and then they might be going to another provider for like counseling, for example. Or they might be in a partial hospitalization program. So it might look a little bit different for social work as opposed to ABA and OT, PT. So the next conversation or the next topic is discussing some common barriers that families face with insurance. And I can say first off, The first one is really denials due to what insurance companies might say is not medically necessary. And again, like you said, it's kind of a business and they have to prove that the services are medically necessary. And sometimes as a parent, you might end up having to advocate because the insurance might deny services and say, hey, this child seems to be doing well and they no longer need services. And sometimes we might come across that with ABA therapy where we have a kid that is making a lot of progress and the insurance might say, hey, they don't need you guys anymore. And then that's when it's like, he might be doing well in one area, but there's some more skills that we do need to target.
Yeah, and I think a good way to think about it as a parent is kind of quality of life versus required for skill set, right? So I've had kids I work with who physically cannot feed themselves, they use their hands versus utensils. So the insurance company unfortunately doesn't see that as medically necessary, right? They can still feed themselves, but as a parent they're like, but my kid's eating spaghetti with their hands. So it's kind of tricky as providers because I always fall on the side of the parents being like, yeah, I want to work on this, but just being aware that there might be things that are really important to you as a parent, but the insurance company might not see it as that. And as providers, we definitely become very deft at being able to talk about and advocate for why these things are important and helping to kind of speak that, insurance jargon, I think, is the tougher part.
Absolutely. And another barrier is the limited provider networks. And I know with a lot of insurance companies, they have in-network and out-of-network providers. And some insurance plans may not allow out-of-network providers, and you have to work with the providers that are in-network with the insurance company, or the family might have some significant out-of-pocket costs. And I know, for example, with ABA therapy, as we know, there's already a shortage of ABA therapy providers. And, not every provider may be credentialed with every insurance. So that could definitely be a barrier for families that want services, but that provider may not carry or cover or work with their insurance.
And I know for OT, sometimes there can be sort of, I don't want to call them loopholes because it's definitely not that. It's a lot of work, but there can be times where you can try to advocate for that. I know I have feeding credentials and I work with kids for feeding therapy. And there's some parents who the in-network providers within their area don't have feeding credentials. And so they need to come to a therapist that has that. And so in those situations, you can apply for an appeal with your insurance saying, my child needs this type of services. The people in my network don't have it, but this person outside it does. And again, it's a long process, but if it's something that is really important and necessary, you can go through an additional process to try to get that approval.
Absolutely. Another barrier is session hour caps or service limits. So it kind of goes back to you get approved, but you're only allowed so many sessions. And that can be a barrier, especially if, the child is getting services, they're showing progress, and then all of a sudden they have to abruptly stop because there is no more authorized visits.
Or on the other hand, that there's a minimum for them to cover it. A lot of insurance, I believe it's about 10 hours for them to cover the services. But if children are also receiving, OT, speech, they're going to school, sometimes it's hard to meet those hours when, there's only so many hours in the day, and not to have them maxed out constantly. So also kind of seeing if they cover kind of push-in services. Can you have ABA providers, I know some BCBAs do school consult, how to work those hours in so that you don't lose your coverage.
And I also think knowing about your insurance, whether the visits are considered a visit or whether they're considered based on the unit. So some insurance companies, I know Medicaid in Connecticut for OT, they approve units. So they approve each unit is 15 minutes. So they give, you have this many units. So I could use 4 in one session and have an hour-long session with a client, or I could use 2 in half an hour, and that would then give that client way more, visits if I'm doing half an hour versus an hour, versus some private insurance companies just do a visit. So it could be half an hour, it could be an hour and a half, it depends. So I think knowing what your insurance company considers approval can also help you as a family schedule what works best for you.
Right. And then also another barrier is those high deductibles and copays. So some insurance plans may have very high deductibles or copays, and when you're thinking about, as a parent, you're looking at ABA therapy and say your child is getting 15 hours a week and that BT is there 5 days a week, and every time they come out there's a copay of $30, that can kind of add up. And also become a barrier to the families as well, or even OT sessions where they might be an OT 2 or 3 times a week, and then they have a $50 copay every session, that's $150 a week.
Mm-hmm.
So that can definitely be a barrier for families. There's something to think about. So the next topic we're going to talk about is some strategies for advocating with insurance, because we just talked about some barriers that families face and, you know, some of the challenges with insurance companies as well. So some strategies for advocating for insurance is, the first thing I would say is requesting an appeal, kind of like what you were saying earlier. It's okay to, you know, reach out, because a lot of times with insurance is, if they deny authorization, sometimes you might get a letter from in the mail from the insurance saying that they denied the claim, and then they might give you the information on how you can appeal the request. And it is okay to request an appeal and ask to speak with someone and express your concerns as a parent. I know that, you know, as a provider, we do that a lot for the kiddos that we work with. As a provider, we also are able to request an appeal to help families. I know personally, like, I've been on the phone with, you know, with a peer review person at some of the insurance companies advocating for medical necessity for kiddos. And a lot of times I also encourage families and providers to definitely get like a letter of medical necessity, collaborate with those medical providers that are working with that child, because a lot of times when we collaborate with like their pediatrician that's working with them, and they're able to also document a medical necessity need, it also brings forth a stronger case for appeal.
Yeah, and I think kind of understanding too that, like, for a parent or for a provider, like, my network is small, right? So I have my kids that I work with, but insurance companies have thousands of clients, and so sometimes it can be a paperwork thing. I've had one where I had a client that was denied for services, and I called them up, and they're like, "Oh, well, you didn't check this box," and I'm like, "I did though," and they're like, "Oh, okay, cool," and then they approve it. So sometimes it can just be a logistical thing, but I think always going through that appeal, that you're right as a I guess as a member, right? You, as a member of insurance, you're allowed to go through appeal. We can go through our own appeal. Parents can do their own appeal. So I always encourage families to go through that, because it's worth it.
Yeah, I think too, like the beginning of the navigating the insurance process too, you can always reach out. Some insurance companies have like a designated ABA representative that kind of know the ins and outs and can give you the most information, and it's just a good contact to have to kind of rely on when you have those questions or concerns, or need that extra boost if you have to navigate the appeal process.
Oh, wait. Oh, Bree had a comment. Oh, okay. Or, I'm sorry, Dopey. Sorry. You're sitting in for Bree. Okay. So one of the things that Dopey had mentioned is also connecting to community resources such as the Office of Healthcare Advocate, if your state has an office. And a lot of families don't really know about this resource. So the Office of Healthcare Advocate, I know we have one here in Connecticut, they are actually kind of like the ombudsman or the middleman between the insurance companies and families. So they actually help families advocate and help navigate for those tricky times with insurances, like, for example, if they have denials or they're not getting enough coverage. But they're also a resource if, like, a family is looking for coverage as well, or alternatives. There is information and resources that their office provides. So that's definitely another great resource in a way that families can advocate for insurance coverage. So the next topic we're going to talk about is a coordination across services. And I think it's very important to know that, like, when we're working with different providers as a team, we do need to try to avoid that overlap while ensuring like complementary treatment plans, because a lot of insurance companies, if they see that, you know, OT and ABA are working on the same goals, for example, or social work and ABA are working on the same goals, it kind of is like a duplication.
And they'll deny one of them.
Yeah, so definitely avoiding overlap, and I think that's also something like a responsibility mostly really for a provider.
Yeah. But I also think for parents to educate, not educating, but alerting your provider if you're getting other services. Like, I've had, we talked about this with the interdisciplinary team and the coordination of care, but I've had times where parents are like, "Oh, I didn't know my client was getting speech someplace else. I would love to know that, because maybe they're working on something," or, "Oh, they started a social group. Okay, then my emotional regulation goals in OT are now going to bleed into that, so I should change my treatment plan." So it's important just to notify your providers if you're getting other services, because then they can just help advocate and support you the best they can.
Absolutely. So some practical tips for families. One of the things I can think of is definitely keeping organized records of authorizations. EOBs, as well as denials. Those letters that you get, explanation of benefits or denials, when they send that information to you through insurance, definitely keep them because they're good reference. Especially you might get a bill from a provider and be like, wait a minute. Sometimes it can be helpful because it can be like an error on like the provider's side that you can be like, okay, well, the insurance is saying they did cover it, and then you have that documentation. So that's also a way to also stay in the know and kind of knowing your rights as a member. And also like what you were saying about like the insurance reps, like it's okay to ask them questions. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's very huge. And also like using your employer HR advocacy organizations for support as well. So like sometimes there might be some questions about coverage that you might not be able to get from your insurance provider. They might say, hey, you got to talk to the administrator of the plan. And sometimes like your employer, if you have insurance through your employer, there may be like a benefits person that you can reach out to at your place of employment and ask about coverage as well. So they might also be able to help you, especially like if things get a little tricky. For example, if they're saying you don't have coverage for certain items or some certain services, sometimes the HR department can be helpful in giving you information about what their plan covers.
Yeah.
Also with, they can help you with set up a health savings account to cover like those deductibles if your plan does have deductibles, so that, you know, throughout the year you're just kind of putting a little in, so that when that big deductible bill comes, you can use that savings to pay for it.
Right. And it kind of goes back to like the HR department. They might actually have different plans that you can choose from. And like, for example, if you have a plan and you're finding that a lot of your providers are out of network, they may offer other additional plans that you may be able to enroll in. So next topic we're going to talk about is looking at, you know, the future of insurance. So we are noticing, you know, there are trends in insurance coverage for autism-related therapies. And a lot of the coverage, of course, comes with specific guidelines and policies, such as, you know, having that medical autism diagnosis is huge. And also, there are some policy changes that are impacting ABA and OT access to services, such as recently, like with the request for Connecticut State Medicaid for the IEPs. And so kind of looking at those policy changes and how, you know, they impact ABA and OT access, even down to the policies that may be impacting like Medicaid coming down the pike and what that will look like, because I can imagine like some of those policies that are the funding changes can also impact the coverage. And, you know, the amount of allotted hours, and that can all be kind of impacted later on down in the future.
And if your insurance company is changing a policy, you'll get notification of it. So you'll get something in the mail. It'll probably be in that fine print. You'll open it up and be like, well, what is this? But like Alicia said, save all of that, because that's a notification of those types of things, so you can keep track of, hey, I was notified at this date, but then, you know, this happened. So it can kind of help keep timelines.
Absolutely. So just some closing thoughts from today's discussion. We know that navigating insurance is definitely not easy. But, you know, parents are doing an incredible job by just showing up and advocating for their child, as well as caregivers. Every step, no matter how small, it moves you closer to the support your family deserves. And remember, as a parent, guardian, or caregiver, you got this. And you're not alone on this journey to working with insurance companies. As we understand, it can be a challenging task. So, any other closing thoughts?
I think just being comfortable having a conversation with your provider, like whether it's a financial thing, whether it's a, you know, you only get a certain number of visits, just talking, saying, hey, I really want to get my child some support and services. This is kind of what I'm dealing with. And then your provider can be really flexible. I know I've worked at places where we had, you know, you have to come every week and a family wants to come every other week. So then we've referred them to a client or a clinic that has a more flexible scheduling policy. Or I've had some where parents only cover, like the insurance only covers a couple visits, so we do the eval, and then I create a really robust home program so the families can carry it over. So I think just being honest and having that conversation, your providers are there for you, and they really care about you and your kids, so they want to help you in any way they can.
I think too, staying kind of in touch with your community and looking for like those community health networks and resources that can kind of help you navigate and connect you to like the providers you need, because it takes a village. So stay in the community with it.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. So thank you everyone for tuning into this episode of CollabTalk. If you found this information valuable, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. Got thoughts or questions? Drop them in the comments. We'd always love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep this conversation going. To learn more about collaborative ABA services, check us out on our website at www.collaborativaaservices.com and our additional social media pages. You'll never know what we're up to on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and
TikTok.
Oh yeah, TikTok. Bye.
CollabTalk is a copyright of Collaborative ABA Services, making a difference in children's lives.